Imagine being thrown into a path you never chose. A loveless marriage, an uncertain future, and a partner whose soul seems as distant as the coldest star in the sky. This is how Helena's journey begins, determined by emotions to live a life that was not hers, alongside a man marked by deep hurts and traumas that he himself was able to name. How many times have you felt like you were fighting against something bigger than you could bear? That, even surrounded by people, emptiness seemed to be the only thing keeping you company? This story is not only about the difficulties of an imposed marriage, but about something much bigger: the ability to transform pain into learning and the wreckage into bridges to something new. Raoul, with his armor of coldness, and Helena, with her restless heart, are examples that even ashes can hide embers waiting for a breath to rekindle. But what does it take to be reborn from difficulties? To transform hurts into love and find happiness where there seemed to be only shadows? Get ready to discover how Helena and Raoul faced their demons and transformed the suggested into a story of overcoming, rebirth, and true love. And you, are you also prepared to find the light that may be hidden in the ashes of your own life? Helena, with her restless soul full of dreams, never imagined that her life would take such an unexpected turn. She had grown up believing in love as a natural construction, but she found herself trapped in a forced agreement, sealed by the needs of her family. Her marriage to Raoul Montenegro was nothing more than a cold contract, where the word love seemed distant and meaningless. For her, it was like being thrown into a rough sea, without knowing where the current would take her. Raoul, in turn, was no less resistant to the union. For him, Helena was just another piece on a board where control was crucial. A man of few words and a rigid posture, he accepts the marriage out of duty, not desire. From the beginning, their coexistence revealed an enormous barrier between the two, like an invisible wall that separated them into completely different worlds. Helena felt like a stranger in her own house, while Raoul seemed indifferent. The first few days on the farm were suffocating for Helena. Raoul's silence was reassuring, and the immensity of the property seemed to only reinforce the loneliness she carried in her chest. Still, her determination to find some form of light was remarkable. She spent hours in the garden, tending to the flowers that were her only company. Perhaps, deep down, she believed that caring for the beauty of the land would help to plant hope in her own life. For a young woman like Helena, full of vitality and dreams, the reality of forced marriage was almost a punishment. But even in the most difficult situations, there is room for small rebellions. She began to find comfort in conversations with Maria, the housekeeper, an experienced woman with a warm heart. Maria was the only person who offered Helena a glimpse of genuine friendship amidst the force that dominated the farm. Curiously, Maria seemed to know more about Raoul than he himself was willing to reveal. In moments of trust, I spoke about the burden he carried, although I never went into detail. Helena listened attentively, intrigued but also suspicious. How could someone so cold and calculating be worthy of pity? That was the question that echoed in her mind, unanswered, like a riddle waiting to be deciphered. Despite Raoul's harshness, there was something in the way he observed life that Helena could not ignore. There was a hidden sadness, a weight that seemed not only of responsibility, but of a past that haunted him. Although she resisted any kind of empathy, she could not help but feel a twinge of curiosity. Perhaps, she thought, no one was as simple as they seemed. Thus, the story of Helena and Raoul began as a game of opposing forces, where each struggled to stand firm in their own principles. However, the forces of life have a curious way of breaking down barriers that are insurmountable. What seemed like a prison to Helena perhaps hid an unexpected path, where pain and difficulty could, who knows, transform into something deeper. The days following the wedding were heavy, like a storm that never dissipated. Raoul was a man of few words and many walls, always surrounded by an almost oppressive silence. Helena, on the other hand, was full of expression and vivacity, but was trapped in a colorless routine. Meals together were a minefield of unspoken words, and the house seemed to echo the tension between the two. She wondered if it would ever stop being just an agreement. Helena began to seek refuge wherever she could. Her garden became a sacred space, a small oasis where she could breathe without feeling the weight of Raoul's presence. There, she spoke to the flowers as if she were talking to old friends, believing that perhaps, somehow, those delicate details were capable of hearing her pain. But no matter how hard she tried to escape, the reality of marriage always enveloped her again like a shadow. Raoul, in turn, seemed indifferent to Helena's attempts to find a problem. He devoted himself to his work on the farm with an almost mechanical obsession, as if avoiding the house was his way of coping. For him, Helena was a necessary commitment, but nothing more. However, no matter how rigid his posture was, there were moments when his eyes betrayed a glimpse of something deeper, an internal conflict that he would never verbalize. In the midst of all this, Maria, the housekeeper, became an essential figure in Helena's life. With a wisdom that only experience brings, Maria offers simple but valuable advice, like a lighthouse in the midst of darkness. Love can start as a spark, girl. But you need space to breathe, she said, while helping Helena look at the garden. Although the young girl found it difficult to believe, Maria's words left a seed in her mind. It was not uncommon for Helena to feel the attempt to confront Raoul, to demand answers for his coldness. But something has always held her back, perhaps the fear that this confrontation will make everything even worse. She began to realize that sometimes someone's silence speaks louder than any words. And in the midst of these silences, he began to notice the details. The way Raoul took care of the farm, the respect that the workers had for him, the scars on his soul that were invisible, but were there. The nights were particularly lonely for Helena. The room he shared with Raoul was large, but the space between them seemed even larger. She wondered how two people could be so close physically and yet so far apart emotionally. These reflections led her to imagine if one day the distance between them could be reduced, or if they would be condemned to live as strangers under the same roof. The difficult coexistence seemed like an endless battle, where each day was a small war fought in silence. However, there was something about Helena's resilience that kept her standing. Even without knowing how, she felt that the cycle of distance and difficulty could not last forever. After all, even the harshest winters need to make room for spring. And maybe, just maybe, some small gesture could be the start of a transformation. It was on a seemingly ordinary day that the silent tension between Helena and Raoul suffered its first crack. While tending to the garden, Helena, distracted by pruning a rose bush, tripped on a loose stone and fell, twisting her ankle painfully. Her cry of pain echoed through the property, and to her surprise, Raoul was the first to appear, with a worried expression she had never seen before. He carried her inside with unexpected gentleness, as if, in that moment, all the barriers between them were irrelevant. Raoul's care was direct, but surprisingly gentle. He improvised a bandage, asked Maria for herbal compresses, and stayed by Helena's side, making sure she was comfortable. It was the first time she had seen him so close, so human. For the first time, their eyes met without the barrier of obligations or heavy silence. There was something in that moment that seemed greater than the declarations that had brought them together. That simple gesture from Raoul was a turning point in Helena's mind. As she worried about her ankle, she reflected on the expression on his face as he carried her. He wasn't just the cold, indifferent man she thought she knew. The way he cared for her revealed a hidden side, as if behind the facade there was someone who carried not only hurt feelings, but also a capacity to care that even he seemed unaware of. During Helena's recovery, Raoul began to appear in the garden more frequently, almost as if he wanted to check on her progress without admitting it. In these brief interactions, the dynamic between them began to change. It was no longer just a dry exchange of words. There was a growing curiosity in their eyes, an unknown terrain being explored, even if subtly. It was as if the accident had planted a seed that was slowly beginning to germinate. Helena, for her part, felt torn between gratitude for Raoul's care and confusion about what it had done. Could it be possible that this man, so clothed in his armor of coldness, had some hidden tenderness? This doubt kept her alert, but also curious. She began to notice small gestures that she had previously ignored, like Raúl adjusting her blanket when she was dozing or bringing her tea without her asking. The incident also gave Maria, the housekeeper, something to comment on. With a discreet smile, she murmured to Helena, "Even the hardest stones can be sculpted by water, girl. You just need to know how to flow." These words stayed in Helena's head, like a riddle that I needed to solve. Could Raúl be allowing himself to change, even if just a little? And more importantly, was she ready to accept this change? Despite the new nuances in their coexistence, Helena knew that Raúl's gesture was only the beginning. Like all the difficulties, there was still something different now, a spark of humanity that could grow or disappear. However, like any seed, this relationship would need to be cultivated. And perhaps Raúl's past, which until then was a mystery, had more to say about who he really was. The mystery surrounding Raúl began to unfold during a casual conversation between Helena and Maria. While serving tea, Maria said something that seemed out of context but was full of meaning. "A wounded heart closes itself off, girl, but it never forgets what hurt it." That phrase seemed to refer to Raúl, and Helena, curious as always, took advantage of the moment to ask questions. Maria hesitated, but ended up telling her about a betrayal Raúl had suffered in the past, something that had left a deep impression on him. According to Maria, years ago, Raúl was engaged to a woman named Isadora. She was a magnetic figure, full of charm, but as cunning as she was fascinating. Raúl's relationship with Isadora was intense and full of promise, until he discovered that she was cheating on him with one of his best friends. The impact was devastating. Raúl, who until then had been a more open man, became cold and suspicious. For Helena, this revelation was like finding the missing piece of a puzzle. Helena became thoughtful as she listened to the story. It wasn't easy to accept that Raúl's coldness came from a place of pain and disappointment. Still, she began to see that the barriers he would build were, in fact, defense mechanisms. This realization caused something to change inside her. It wasn't complete empathy, there was still hurt between them, but an initial understanding that softened her judgment. Interestingly, Helena began to notice more details in Raúl's behavior that corroborated Maria's story. He avoided talking about feelings or trusting anyone, as if he was always prepared to be betrayed again. This explained a lot of his distant behavior in their marriage. For Helena, understanding Raúl's past was like opening an old, dusty book, but full of hidden truths. Helena's relationship with Maria also deepened after that conversation. Maria, with her discreet wisdom, seemed to know exactly what to say to keep Helena thinking. Have you ever thought that sometimes forgiveness is more about the one offering it than the one receiving it? Maria asked, leaving Helena speechless. This idea of forgiveness bothered her, but also intrigued her. Could she forgive Raúl for his coldness, knowing what he had gone through? Despite the revelations, Helena could not simply ignore Raúl's behavior. His story explained a lot, but it did not justify everything. She began to ponder how she could deal with this new layer of complexity in their relationship. Would it be possible to help him overcome the past without losing herself in the process? This was a question that Helena could not answer on her own, but it guided her thoughts. Now, Helena's view of Raúl was different. He was still a man full of defenses and bad feelings, but also someone who perhaps needed love more than he was willing to admit. This knowledge planted a new uneasiness in Helena. If Raúl's past had made him so closed off, what would it take to open those doors again? And more importantly, would she have the strength to do so? The tension between Helena and Raúl began to dissipate subtly, almost imperceptibly. Small shared moments began to create common ground between them. Conversations that had previously been unthinkable began to happen in the late afternoons, while they watched the sunset on the porch. Raúl, although still reserved, seemed to open up slowly, as if words had finally found a way to escape his defenses. Helena, in turn, felt a mix of collapse and anxiety in the face of this new dynamic. In one of these moments, Raúl confided something that surprised Helena: his admiration for her work in the garden. "You have the patience to deal with things that need time to bloom," he said, with a tone that mixed sincerity and shyness. For Helena, hearing this was unexpected, but also revealing. For the first time, she felt that he saw in her something more than what his wife had imposed on him by a family agreement. One night, during a heavy storm, the power went out on the farm. Forced to spend the night together in the living room, Raoul and Helena were surrounded by candles and the need to talk to break the silence. The sound of the rain seemed to create an intimate atmosphere, and Raoul, in a rare moment of vulnerability, confessed, "I didn't think I was capable of loving again. But you make me question that." Helena felt her heart race, not knowing exactly what to say. It was as if the world had stopped for a moment. After this confession, the relationship between the two took a leap. Moments that had been tense were filled with restrained laughter and long glances. Helena felt that, little by little, Raoul was allowing her to see the man behind the armor. He began to share stories from his childhood, memories of lighter times, and she responded with stories of her own, creating an exchange that had never existed before. Working on the farm also became a point of connection. Raoul invited Helena to learn about better processes and make small decisions by his side. This practical, yet discreet partnership led both to begin to see each other with more respect. Raoul admired Helena's intelligence and determination, while she saw in him a leader who, despite his wounds, cared deeply for the people around him. One afternoon, as they walked together after a rainstorm, Raoul held Helena's hand for the first time, without haste or words. The simple gesture carried more meaning than any speech. For Helena, it was like feeling the sun after days of storms. For Raoul, it was a step into the unknown, but one he felt was necessary. The connection that began to form was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. Yet, even in the midst of this closeness, there was something hanging in the air, something that Raoul seemed to still keep to himself. Helena felt that the past still had more to reveal, and although she wanted to enjoy the moments of growing happiness, she knew that the path to true love would, incidentally, be crossed by more challenges. The question I was asking was, would they be ready to face them together? The calm that settled between Helena and Raoul was abruptly interrupted when Maria, on her deathbed, called Helena for one last conversation. With a weak voice, but sent hurriedly, Maria revealed a truth that Helena would never have expected. The woman who had betrayed Raoul in the past was none other than Isadora, Helena's cousin. The impact of this revelation was like a sweeping wave. Everything that seemed to make sense was now shrouded in a new layer of chaos and uncertainty. The news left Helena stunned. How could Isadora, the cousin who was always so confident and persuasive, have been responsible for so much pain? And, more importantly, how would Raoul react upon learning that she and Helena shared blood ties? Maria, with her usual wisdom, made it clear that hiding the truth was not an option. "The truth, even when it hurts, is always better than silence," he said, before closing his eyes for the last time. It didn't take long for the situation to become even more complicated. Isadora reappeared in the village, like a storm that no one expected. With the same charm and charisma as before, she tried to get closer to Raoul, using her manipulation skills to stir up the emotions he had left buried. Helena watched from afar, feeling torn between insecurity and a determination to protect what she was beginning to build with Raoul. The confrontation was concluded. Helena met Isadora at the entrance to the farm and, in a mix of courage and anger, asked her cousin for the first time, "You have already suffered enough damage. What more do you want?" he said, his voice firm, but his heart beating fast. Isadora, with a defiant smile, tried to insinuate that Raoul would never forget her, but Helena was unmoved. The firmness in her eyes showed that she was willing to fight. Raoul, upon learning of Isadora's presence, was visibly shaken. However, something inside him had changed. Unlike before, he didn't let himself be carried away by the sweet but empty words of the woman who had betrayed him. When Helena, frankly, told him about the parenthesis with Isadora, her event was surprising. Instead of anger, Raoul declared that Helena had been honest. It was as if, for the first time, he fully trusted someone. Isadora's presence was short, but enough to revive memories and sorrows. However, she didn't count on the strength that Raoul and Helena began to develop as a couple. Together, they faced Isadora's provocations with maturity and, above all, unity. Helena, instead of backing down, showed Raoul that he didn't need to face his past alone. For her, this was more than a proof of love. It was a statement that they were in the same moment. When Isadora left the village, defeated by her own arrogance, it became clear that the love that Raoul and Helena were building was stronger than any ghost of the past. Even so, this episode left its mark. Helena knew that Raoul needed time to process everything, and she herself felt the weight of the revelations. But, despite everything, there was one certainty. They were getting closer to becoming something much bigger. After Isadora's departure, the farm began to gain new energy, almost as if the weight of the past had finally lifted. Raoul and Helena, now more united, decided to transform the space that previously seemed so oppressive into a true home. Together, they planned small renovations to the house, made more space for Helena's garden, and even created a special place for community meetings. It was as if each physical change reflected the emotional transformation they were both experiencing. Raoul, who has always been known for his series, started a show with a lighter and more accessible side. At lunches with the farm workers, they made subtle jokes that brought out sincere smiles, something unimaginable months ago. Helena, in turn, was no longer the cornered woman who arrived there. She now felt part of that land, that cycle, and the happiness that began to sprout in her life seemed to be a reflection of the sensations that she herself had planted. A milestone in this renaissance was the celebration of a festival on the farm, something that hadn't happened in years. Helena and Raoul organized a dedicated party, inviting everyone in the village to participate. On the night of the event, under the light of the lanterns and the sound of laughter and music, the two exchanged a look that said more than words could express. It was as if, at that moment, we both scheduled how much we had overcome together. Their relationship had become more than a marriage of convenience. Raoul began to show his affection with small gestures, such as leaving affectionate notes for Helena in unexpected places. Helena, in turn, took care of Raoul in details that she only noticed, such as preparing his favorite tea or adjusting his clothes before a date. These subtle projections built a foundation of true love, something neither of them imagined possible. Raoul's transformation was especially notable. He was no longer the closed and suspicious man that Helena knew. Despite his scars, he was learning to trust again, and much of that was diverted from Helena's constant, patient presence. For her, seeing Raoul open up was like watching a stubborn flower bloom, finally finding the courage to face the sun. Together, they discovered that love is not something that just happens. It is built, cared for, and carried out. Helena also felt that, for the first time, she was living her own version of happiness. This wasn't what she had imagined when she dreamed of love, but it was much more real and powerful. The farm, once a scene of isolation, now seemed like a place of infinite possibilities. The flowers in Helena's garden had never been so vibrant, as had her spirit, which now overflowed with strength and serenity. Despite all the progress, Helena and Raoul knew that the path to love was not a straight line. They were ready to face new challenges together, now with a solid foundation of trust and mutual respect. With the past finally put into perspective, the future seemed full of promise. After all, as Maria used to say, after the storm, the sky is never the same. It always carries the colors of rebirth. Agora que você acompanhou essa jornada, chegou o momento de reflexão. Quantas vezes você já olhou para as dificuldades da vida como barreiras intransponíveis? Em vez de evitá-los, você pudesse transformá-los em pontes para futuro melhor? A história de Helena e Raoul nos mostra que mesmo das situações mais improváveis podem surgir licos preciosos, e que a dor, quando encarada com coragem, pode dar lugar a renascimento caio de propósito e amor. Então, o que tal aplicar isso a sua própria vida? Talvez sea hora de olher para os desafios como novo olher, refletir sobre suas proprias cinzas e descobrir as brasas que ainda estão ali, esperando para reaparecer. Pensem uma dificuldade que você tem enfrentado. O que pode ser feito para transformar essa situação em aprendizado? Quem sabe seja uma conversa adiada perdeu necessário, ou o mesmo projeto que você deixou de lado. Compartilhe suas ideias nos comentários. Qual parte dessa história mais tocou você? E lembre-se, para continuar explorando temas como esse inspirar histórias de superação e aprendizado, inscreva-se no canal, ative o sininho e junte-se a nos nessa jornada de transformação. A próxima história pode ser exatamente o que você precisa ouvir.